Welcome everyone to your February talking circle for professional development grants. We're going to let everyone get their audio connected and then get started. Since as we wait, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat which organization you're representing today, we'd really appreciate that. Say hello, and again, just put the organization you're representing today in the chat so that we know who was all here. I'll wait just a little bit more, seeing people get their putting their audio on. Couple more coming in. There we go. Again, we have several more joining us, so we'll just wait a little bit. If you're just sort of coming on and putting your audio on, you are joining the February PD Talking Circle, so welcome. Please go ahead in the chat and share what organization you are representing today. Okay, let me just check, see if everybody's got their audio connected. Looks like we're doing good. Okay, just again, another reminder. I might be reminding you through today, but if you haven't already, go ahead and put in the chat the organization that you're representing. So again, we can know who is here in attendance. And let's get started. Let's start with our regular disclaimer.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
Okay, now that we're all disclaimed by that very familiar voice, Sarah Brightwell, who will be returning on Monday. So we're going to be happy to see her come back, but also kind of sad because, it's always great to stay with your baby and spend all that time with your baby. But we're going to be excited to have her back on our talking circles and getting to continue to work and prepare for, the project directors meeting and all the fun stuff coming up in the future. Just wanted to go over today's agenda, working on recruitment candidate, the facts around that, grant administration updates, also an overview for your PDPDCS, and then upcoming events. If you're just joining right now, you want to go ahead and please put in the chat the organization you are representing today. Sorry, I sound like a broken record, but we want to make sure that we capture who's all in attendance today. And I will turn it over to your amazing program officer, Angela.
Thank you, Alani. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Sarah. I just want to thank you guys for certainly carrying the torch these last couple of months and stepping in for Sarah. I know it's been a big effort amongst all of you, and you guys have done a great job. So thank you for supporting the work. Welcome everybody, welcome back, and seeing many of you again after just seeing you earlier this week on the PDP-DCS training. If you didn't get to make that, just Karen will talk about that in a little bit. I hope everybody's doing well. I promise not to make any references to the Super Bowl outside of saying go Rams. And I'm going to move on. Let's introduce or reintroduce Karen Schroll from Anlar Westat. And as you guys know, she's our wonderful help desk support person. She serves as the deputy project director that supports me and a lot of the data and the work around the DCS. So thank you, Karen, for coming back with us today. And as Alani shared, we'll be talking a little bit more, just giving sort of a 50,000-foot overview of what we talked about earlier this week. And hopefully, if you did join us earlier in the week and any questions have come up as you've started to kind of play around, if you haven't before, or you have emergent questions, today's a good time to ask those. Next slide, please. So many of you have been furiously working at the recruitment process. Obviously, we're speaking to the FY21 cohorts, but I wanted to address some of the questions, or frankly, share some of the questions, great questions that many of you have asked over the last few weeks as you ramp up that work. Let's go to the next slide. So these are just a few that I selected based on the conversations, but it's really more to help you all kind of share in the understanding and the knowledge that's been gained from people who have asked the questions. And also, if you have not started on the recruitment or you're just getting ready to do so, this is a good prompt to be thinking about some important issues that I know have come across the desk of some of your colleagues. So one of the big FAQs that comes up more and more as a result of this program having been around for a long time and being of benefit to many of the people in the very same communities that you, our grantees, have been able to support through multiple grants over the years. What happens, of course, is that we end up with a growing number of individuals who have participated in past PD training programs. So sometimes it's somebody who has, for example, been in a teacher training program, they didn't finish, they left, exited without completion, and a couple of years later, they're coming back and they're ready to finish. And maybe they're at a different institution or the same institution, and they're asking for reentry and to be a part of the program again. So people ask, can they do that? And of course, my very federal government answer is it depends, right? So, and in most cases, yes, of course. One of the things that we always ask is be sure you get in touch with us, with me or with the help desk. One is and when I say you get in touch, meaning you, the grant project director, right? Or the coordinator that's supporting this work. And that's really with the intent of, one, initially identifying that this person is in good standing, right? So you want to make sure that their past participation hasn't resulted, for example, in a default of their debt. So that's probably a critical piece, because you want to make sure that that's not going to be an issue for the purposes of enrolling them in your institution or, for future funding. So please be sure to get in touch with us about that. And sometimes it's immediately after, sometimes there's delays. So there are a lot of sort of case by case extenuating circumstances. So I'm not going to go into all the different examples outside of to say, be sure to get in touch with us and be sure you're asking that question of your prospective candidates, because sometimes you don't know and they're not going to necessarily volunteer. But if you ask that question, it helps to give you a heads up of how to do that. But the short answer, for the most part, I'm going to say yes, with some caveats. They can. Now, what does that mean? So, what does that mean for future payback, for example? So that's sort of an outgrowth question, right? So does that mean if I'm in, Carmelita, I'm going to pick on you if you don't mind. If I went to University of Mary's teacher training program, I finished, I didn't even waste any time. I enrolled immediately into the master's program, and I'm doing an administrator training program right now and getting support. So when I finally graduate and I'm done and I'm ready to go, does that mean that now, even though I have my admin certificate, I now have to go back and be a teacher to finish that, to do that service payback? And the answer is no. You can fulfill all of those, and I'm just going to make this up. If it was 2 years of teacher training, 1.5 years of admin training, you can complete, participant, that 3.5 years of service payback as an administrator. So just want to make sure that's clear to folks. And that's, again, if they're doing the sort of that immediate bounce, right? And that's typically the case. I'm going to speak more broadly to the situation where they have multiple, grants or multiple benefits, if you will, from different grants or the same grant. But just the long and short is, yes, they're going to take whatever the latest degree is, and they can complete that service payback for all of it from a qualifying job from that latest degree. Okay, so they don't have to go back and teach, right? If we're talking about somebody with both teacher and admin training support. So good question, Doug. I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat. And Doug asked, what identifying? So what do I need? You call me up and what are you supposed to have for me? You can start with just the name. And if you want to write a note to me via email and just give me a name, that's great. I would say don't give me anything more than a name, first and last name. We can start there. If you happen to know what the name of the institution was, that's even better. But even if you don't, starting with the name, we look it up in the system and then we can go from there. I'd probably reach out, but just as a reminder, no social security numbers or other personal identifying information in that correspondence. So if it's easier for us to have a call about it, that's fine too. And I've done that before with some of you and we've looked it up real time, so that's plausible. And again, that can be me or the help desk. I'm going to move to the second question. This is somebody who asked, if I participate in the administrator training program, can I get service payback credit for concurrent administrator work? The short answer is no. And that is because if you recall, and Karen's gone through this, and I think she'll probably note this again at some point, but when you put somebody in the DCS, they cannot start earning any service payback prior to the date that you put in of them having exited with completion. Okay. So just a reminder that, and there's always sort of that kind of limbo, if you will, maybe after graduation, right? And that's kind of inevitable. And a couple of things happen, and this is sort of wonky, but it's when you're in the system, if you know that they graduated on May 15, but all the paperwork and all the administrative stuff associated with finalizing them and you feeling comfortable to actually enter an exit date for them might not be till June 1st. Meanwhile, that person might have already, gotten a contract and maybe started June 1, or May 15. I'm just going to make that up for now, immediately after their graduation. So there's kind of that limbo. So it's really important that you're communicating with your participants to let them know when you have actually put in that exit date for them with completion or without, just so that they can be clear that from that date, they can be expected to be able to request service payback where it's relevant, where they have that teaching position or admin position. Okay. What counts as qualifying employment? So I get this a lot still, which is it's many parts, right? So there are many parts to this. One is, the high proportion definition. It must be in an LEA, a local educational agency, with a high proportion of Native students, right? And we've defined what that high proportion is. It's back to those lists that we've talked about. We also know, and that you looked at for your application, right? You looked to make sure that you had some schools or districts rather that were on that list and that had a threshold, a percentage of students higher than the corresponding state's percentage. It also has to be in a position that for which they were trained. So that tends to not be as big an issue for teachers as it might be, for example, for people coming out of an administrator training. And I get a lot of questions, and I've had a lot of really good questions of, well, does this count? Does that count? And here's two things to think about when you're thinking about, well, what am I going to tell them? One is, what did you say in your application? I go back to your application. You identified a need based on a need for principals or superintendents or whatever the roles were, the administrator roles in your region. The expectation and the goal is to put those people in those roles that are qualifying based on what you wrote in your application. Now, you can't control where people want to go, and maybe they want to go someplace else, but that someplace else still has to be qualifying, meaning it still has to be, if they have an administrative certificate, if it's specific to a certain topic, then they should be looking for a role in that certain topic. What I tend to hear of late is, well, I'm still a teacher, but I've been ascribed or assigned certain administrative responsibilities. And really, I say two things about that. I think there are reasons and ways, depending on the state that you're in, and sometimes even in the district, where that can qualify. Because it's really up to the LEA to define what is or is not an administrator position, right? An administrator FTE. I also think about sort of bigger picture, which is that HR person, whether, the head of HR for a school district or the principal, whoever's verifying that employment, they are signing a federal assurance saying this is an administrator role. So we are not going to get into the job of prescribing, and I don't think you want us to get into the job of prescribing what that administrator position is or isn't, but it has to be something that the district considers an administrator role. So I know this tends to be much more challenging when we're talking about small, remote places often where people are wearing 7 hats, right? So it might be a teacher that also has some FTE, maybe as an assistant principal, maybe as some other kind of administrative role in the district, whatever it is. I invite you to share those scenarios when you're not sure. One, because we want to make sure it's right. But there is another reason. As Karen and I have been working on this issue and addressing what does and doesn't count, the more examples we have that don't fit that nice, neat, administrator position, right? Of superintendent, principal, vice principal, whatever those more obvious admin roles are, it's helpful to understand just how nuanced it may get so that we can make sure we are more rather than less inclusive of what those roles might be and where it matters, right? And at the end of the day, again, I go back to the intent of the law, to the intent of this program, which is to build capacity of Native American education professionals to be in an administrator position that frankly gives them authority, right? And gives them policy-making responsibilities and really gives a voice to this community. So I think about it in the philosophical terms and also sort of the real terms of what are HR folks going to be comfortable signing off on, right? This is them saying yes, verifying. Karen, I don't know if you have any more you want to share on that, or if there's anybody who has any questions on that.
I think you've covered it really well, Angela. Thank you.
Okay. And again, that's to me an ongoing conversation because it's evolving, right? Especially in the context of teacher and frankly administrator shortages that we're going to see start to creep up and start to contribute to the redefining sometimes of these roles. So we want to be responsive to that and accommodating. Another really important question that has come up is this fourth bullet of, if the state I want to work in is not on the list of LEAs on OIE's website, does that mean I can't work in that state? You can work in any state you want. Our lists are not exhaustive. So as a reminder or initial notification to all of you, I want to let you know that when you see those lists of states with those comparisons of state population to LEA population rates of Native American students, you are looking at a list of states based on where we have had grantees for the last 6 years. So all of the states listed there are representative of locations where we have had grants since 2016. So it is very possible that you have, and we've had some great questions already come up through some of you asking with participants who are like, I'm going to be in Texas, I'm going to be in Florida, I'm going to be in Michigan. Does that mean I can't go there? No, it absolutely does not mean that. It means that we need to give you a list. So that's going to be iterative as needed. So if you have some of those questions, or you see it as likely that there might be a state that's not on that list where you know you might have participants or even candidates that want to know, please let me know and we'll continue to add those states. Okay. And then the last point is induction. Is it required? Again, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pick on you again, Carmelita, because I was reminded about this again as I read your FPR from your older cohort. And there are a couple of things that I want to make really clear. One is that no matter what, grantees, you are required to deliver induction services. Now, the question on the receiving end, right, is, well, what if they don't show up? And I guess I just want to remind you all, one, we are not going to require that, because we don't, and I don't think you want us to, for lots of different reasons. You don't want us to mandate that. However, you can mandate that. You can require that. You can create your own policies, certainly well above and beyond, and be as prescriptive as you want as a program. So if there are issues, you know, that maybe our statutes, our regulations don't necessarily have teeth around, but you and your institution can, and you think that's important to help your people, your participants be successful, then do that. And so certainly you are certainly within, you know, the allowability of this program to require that as a condition of the award to your grants. So you can prescribe whatever requirements, you know, expectations that you want, criteria for your programs. The key is always be equitable. So it's got to be done for everybody, right? So it should be a written policy. Many of you already have a lot of attachments that you assign above and beyond a service payback agreement, for instance, right? Beyond what we require, because ours is just for the actual debt, versus there are programmatic elements that you require, both as a function of the training and degree requirements, but also just sort of programmatic specific requirements that you can actually impose. So really thinking about, you know, and it's not for the sake of mandating just to mandate, but because you know it's going to make a difference, right? In one, participation and engagement. The flip side is, of course, that thinking about the funding. So if you're going to mandate, if you mandate and somebody decides they're going to move 5 states away, you're going to have to make sure you have funds to support that, right? So, or have a vehicle, right? Have a strategy for that remote delivery, have a plan for those partnerships if that's where they want to go. So of course you can't control who everybody decides to go, but again, just be thinking about those different elements. And those are conversations that we can continue to have, especially you guys, 18 grantees, amongst ourselves in some of these future talking circles, if you feel it'll be helpful. I'd love to hear back from you and hear if you'd like to have those sharing opportunities with your colleagues on that. So this is certainly not exhaustive, but I just kind of wanted to take a minute to share some of what I'm hearing, some of the feedback that we've given, and feel free to reach out to me if there's some issues specific to you guys. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. So just some quick updates. I don't think, and I apologize for not making this as explicit as I thought I had before, but we've talked about how the project directors meeting will be remote again this year. So annually, we've asked you to have travel funds set aside for that meeting. Those travel funds will not need to be set aside for you to travel physically. You'll join us remotely. And so please feel free to repurpose those funds as you make plans for the remainder of the year for expenditures. So you can repurpose that to another administrative or, even if you want training fund expenditures. The APR guidance was issued to our FY18 grantees at the end of January. Those APRs are available to the project director on record in G5. Please let me know if you have any questions about that. Our APR guidance for FY21 grantees, a hint, it's going to look exactly the same. It's going to be required at the end of, it'll be issued at the end of this month. And as a reminder, after hearing feedback from you guys, we're having that month lag in between the 18 and the 21 APR due dates. The other thing I want to mention briefly is the large available balance notifications to FY18 grantees. So if you had a large available balance, you got a notification and it said, hey, you have no money. You have no money being spent in your budget. And I want to explain what that means, because it means different things to different people, depending on where you are in that spectrum. By that, what I mean is people got that notification that if they had spent no funds, and when they went and looked in G5, they said, hey, we've been drawing down every month. We have been spending our money. That's true. However, the large available balance is defined by what you received in year 4 for FY18 grantees, and is not factoring in all the carryover that you might have. So even if you've been spending, you are technically still spending what was carried over, and you haven't tapped in yet to that year 4 funding. And so it's considering it considers that a large available balance. Now, I will say that, between you and I, grantees, we know why that is, right? We know the delays. I know I have the explanations. I'm completely aware of delays in implementation and completion of training, so on and so forth, and the expectation that most of you are trying to wrap those up this year. That said, it's really a prompt for that's the kind of information, again, that we will need in your APR to explain that as you work on completing those. So we'll talk about that more during the training, but I just wanted to kind of draw that distinction for folks. And that's all I'll mention outside of in early March. 21 grantees will see the same thing to the extent that you have a large available balance. And I would expect that, frankly, to be most of you, given where you are with recruitment and placement. Carmelita, yes. I'm not going to go into that now because that's going to be an APR discussion, but it is, yes, very true. GEPRA will not be, I'm not asking you to report GEPRA measures in the annual performance reports in the Ed 524s. And that's because you have and always have, whether you realize it or not, reported it via the DCS. And I've basically made a move to try to eliminate the duplication in effort there and to save it. Now, that said, there are those project measures, right? About annual, what you'll recruit annually, what you'll place, retain, what you'll graduate, yada, yada. Those still are required. Those are not the GEPRA. And sometimes I think people get confused between those and the actual GEPRA measures, but we'll talk about that in the APR training. But short answer is yes, you are correct. You are not having to list the GEPRA again in the APR. And he had 524 APR. Next slide. I'm not going to spend any time on this. It's just your due dates. And you guys all know what that is. Next slide. I do want to make mention, this went out through our OIE listserv. And I also just kind of want to note, particularly for those of you who are newer, we have our TA team from Synergy that's on here with us today. They support us. And as you know, they help support us by communicating and covering a lot of logistics in the area of, I'm sorry, not in the area, in terms of email and communication that comes from that email address, oie@seiservices.com. In addition to our TA from both them and from our Westat Andler partners, we also have just a broader OIE-wide program list. And that list goes out to typically all of our grantees. And that list most recently issued an announcement about a new opportunity out of our Office of Special Education Programs. They have, as some of you know, parallel teacher training service payback programs. And they actually have a new competition just out, due April 15. And there is a very targeted focus to include and encourage applicants from minority serving institutions to include tribal colleges and universities. So I just wanted to make you all aware of that. I'd encourage you to go take a look at that as an opportunity. And even if you decide it's not for you right now, i.e., are you kidding me, Angela? That's 2 months from now. But even if it's not now, you should still look at those programs because you might find some certain relevance to it for future competitions. These are things that will continue to happen and continue to be made available. So please take a look at that. Next slide. All right. And with that, Karen, I don't know if you have anything more to say. Thank you, Carmelita. That's right. There's one for leadership as well. Karen knows about those because they actually support those programs as well, our sister programs in OSEP and the Rehabilitation Services Administration. But with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. I threw into the chat a little bit ago if there's anything you wanted me to demonstrate live today. I can jump over and share my screen and let you see anything. Hopefully I covered everything on Wednesday and we'll have that recording up next week. So you can, sit back and rewatch that fabulous demonstration. So today I just want to highlight the things that, again, that we're focusing on. So for those of you that weren't able to join us on Wednesday, those of you that are, finishing up some of the older grants, or those of you that are starting, these are the expectations of what we're expecting that will be done by April 8th. So again, we're looking for you to log in, review your secondary user assignment. We're going to add any new participants that you've funded recently. For everyone that's all the participants that are already in the system, you're going to update funding amounts and the service owed. And then go ahead and take a quick look at the statuses. Again, we'll be doing our ongoing follow-up with the participants while you all are entering data, but we always appreciate your support in encouraging participants to log in. And finally, the deadline again is April 8th. Can we go to the next slide? On Wednesdays, I went through and demonstrated how to log in. One of the main things I would like people to do is also look and see who you have as your secondary user. Because again, you might not be thinking about it. Maybe you do most of the work in the system, but it's good to always just double check who is still listed as your secondary user. Staff changes, you may have taken over the responsibilities. There is no reason for someone to have access to the system given the amount of personally identifiable information. If that person is no longer with your institution or is no longer assisting you, you can go in and remove their rights to the system. You can have no secondary user, or you can add a new person, switch it to someone else. Next slide. And so we're going to add the new records for anyone not already in the PDP DCS. Again, you still have 2 options for adding new participants. We have the digital agreement, and we also have the upload version. If we go to the next slide, this is sort of the process, again, for you to kind of think through. how it works. Again, there's a process whereby you're inputting information, and then the system is doing everything kind of through a series of emails. So you put in your information, the participant gets notified to go in and sign it. If they take a look at it and they don't, agree with the information that you've entered, it could be anything from you accidentally put that they lived on a street, but they actually live on a drive, to like maybe the funding amounts are not what you had agreed to. They can write in and document the changes that they have and send it back to you, whereby you can either reach out to them. And what I said on Wednesday, and I still kind of strongly encourage, is for you to go ahead and have maybe a conversation rather than using the system to do all of the back and forth, to kind of, again, resolve those issues and send it back to the participant for them to sign, and then you sign. And then at that point, you move on to the rest of the process, which is entering like the information about what kind of degree they're working towards. Is it a teacher or an administrator? And then the funding amounts. Next slide, please. Again, when you log in, there's the option where you can go to either the view all participants page, which is sort of your summary report for the status of each of your participants that you've entered. Above that, you can also, actually it's right below that, you can click and look at all of your completed digital service payback agreements. So those of you that might have been doing kind of like a hybrid, like you've had a grant since 2018, and so you've got some that were on paper and you've uploaded previously, those aren't going to show up here. So this is only for the ones where it's brand new and they would have done the digital agreement. But anyone that you've done a digital agreement for is going to show up in this list. You have the ability to download it if you need it, to review it. And then it also tells you which ones, like where things stand. So like in this example, Charles Bingley still needs to review it and sign the agreement. Next slide. So the other option again is to upload a hard copy. We have a PDF version that's a fillable PDF, and actually you can sign it. So it too is kind of electronic, but we still consider it more of the paper version, because you can also print it off and do all of the entering of information by hand. But again, here's where in this section you would go ahead and create the record, enter information, contact information, and then when you got down to section D, you're going to choose the file to upload the version that you need to have there. Next slide. So this is in step 3, where we talk about updating funding and service amounts. It's section H. That's the critical section. So those of you that have added all your participants in previous years, this is the main one that we want to have you go in and update. If this is the final amounts, then you'll be also exiting potentially your scholars and clicking that checkbox. You only have the ability to click the checkbox once you report that the participant is either exiting prior to completion or completing, and then you check that box. But section H is the major section that you should review for all of your enrolled participants. Next slide. And then again, just sort of reiterating how things, in terms of reporting. These, the main page when you log in, even those of you with multiple grants should be able to see one of these summary tables for each and every one of your grants. And again, it tells you exactly where things stand in terms of both the record entry status, the program completion status, and then the participant payback status. So again, we're working on, my circle slid over a little bit, it looks like, but we're worried mostly about those awaiting login, and those that are fulfillment not in progress. Those are the ones that fulfillment not in progress, we kind of went over last time, are folks that have left your program and have not yet started entering service payback information. The awaiting logins are anyone that hasn't gone in and even just logged into their account and worked with the system at all. Next slide. And then again, just a reminder that the deadline of April 8th, you have until midnight, and then we take a quick snapshot and let Angela know if anyone wasn't able to make that deadline. We encourage you to reach out to the help desk early and often if you have any issues, so that come April 8th, there's nothing holding you back from submitting what you need to do. Next slide. So like Angela, going over frequently asked questions, I also kind of went back through some of the things that have come up in either our talking circles or just working on help desk. I have a few frequently asked questions I'm going to go through. And one of the ones that came up recently, and I can't remember which project director brought this to our attention, but I wanted to highlight this. This question comes directly from the frequently asked questions document that's on the website, but I want to highlight it. So when a participant receives partial funding, what are the work or prepayment requirements? And so currently the way the regulations are written is that the service obligation is based solely on the number of academic months. Okay, so I thought it would be easier to kind of work out like with an example. So if we have participant A, they're actually attending classes part-time for 4 months in the fall of 2021. And since they're only going part-time, you're giving them less funding. And then we have participant B, who is attending full-time for the same 4 months, but they are now getting more money because you've also contributed to, say, a stipend or dependent care or something like that. Because the way that the regulations are written, both of the participants have a 4-month service obligation. Okay, if they were to go to cash repayment, obviously participant A owes less and they would only have to repay $5,000 versus participant B would have to repay the $10,000. But as far as the month to month, again, if they receive funding in the month, then they owe a service for a month. It's the same obligation. Okay, next slide. All right, my grant is ending this year. Is there anything I need to do? So yes, I know some of you, and we'll be reaching out to all of you that are ending this year. We kind of keep a running list of who we need to talk to about it. But again, the circles should be, we want to have everybody exiting without completion or having completed or graduated. So in this example, if we look under the program completion status, where it says enrolled, those 2 participants need to move to either exit without completion or completed graduated. Okay, next slide. Again, I think we're doing our best to kind of keep the participants like informed while they're enrolled in your program, so that again they're sort of thinking ahead and knowing what's ahead of them in terms of working with the system after they graduate or leave the program. And so you all will be getting copies of these slides, and I just wanted to list together the information that the participants are going to have on hand to complete their employment record. And we have screenshots on the website that show you like the pages that the scholars see, that the participants see. But again, just as a quick list of the kinds of things that they need to have available to them, again, the dates of employment, whether they're working full-time or part-time, the area of education, is it elementary or secondary? I do kind of touching on one of the things that Angela was talking about, the dates of employment is always a troubling question, I think, because if those folks that are working while they're in the program, they aren't going to be able to enter a start date of employment it has to be after the date that you report them as exiting. What we try to make clear to the employers and to the participants is that what we understand that their official on the record start date occurred before that date. What we're basically asking employers to verify is, were they employed from this date to this current date, if it's a current employment, or from that date to whatever date in the past. We do include a message to the employers, but I would say that it is a common, frequently asked question for both participants that go in and are not able, like the system pops up an error message when they try to enter a date that's before they exited. And the same thing, sometimes we get calls from employers that are like, but they started, 3 months before that date. And so we just kind of explain that really what we're looking at is this, were they employed in this time frame? Next slide. I do want to highlight, you guys have been awesome this past year. I report to Angela monthly on the number of security incidents that have happened in any given month, and I have had 0 to report to her the last many months, really. But I do just want to highlight things again to kind of, as we go into this data collection period, remember these things. So like as Angela mentioned earlier, when you're emailing us about participants, a name is sufficient. We can look things up. We don't need you to send us a social security number. If for some reason you need to send us, identifying information, we need you to encrypt those files. And we have now under our resources website, different ways that you can use to encrypt files. So whichever method you're most comfortable with, hopefully one of those is described there. Again, making a plug for our digital service payback agreement. This eliminates the one issue that we've seen in the past where you accidentally, when you go to that, click on and add the file, like you just accidentally grabbed the wrong one and end up uploading the wrong agreement to the participant. It's a problem because of course the participant can go in now and see the personally identifiable information of someone that is not them. So this digital service payback agreement eliminates that. It also takes care of the redaction for you. For those of you that are uploading files, again, making sure that you just have a really clear naming convention for your files so that you can just be sure, again, double checking that you are uploading the right one to the right person. Next slide. So now we're going to do a quiz. Do we have these set up as polls or are they just slides? Is that okay? All right, so we're gonna, you can put things in the chat. How long do you have to update a participant after the change in the participant status? 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, and this is done annually during the data collection period. So you can just put A, B, C, or D in the chat. Awesome. Yes, it's 30 days. We really don't want you waiting until this data collection period to put in your information. This is really more of a time for you to review records and just make sure everything is lined up. Angela has aligned the APRs, so it's again a great opportunity for you to compare, what you have in your APR to what you have in the system. Ideally, you're updating status changes every 30 days after something has changed. Next slide. Okay, so if the participant has 1 semester left in the training program, but the grant will end 2 months before the participant graduates, which status should I assign this participant? No, it's good that we're reviewing this. So the way things are set up is that in order for someone to count as being graduated or completed for your grant, they have to do it within your grant before your grant ends, right? So again, I know that's the reason why some of you during the COVID time were able to get no cost extensions to allow people to go ahead and finish before your grant actually ended, because this person will end up being reported as exiting without completion. And really, you know, it's not going to prevent the person, you know, they obviously will graduate 2 months from now, but they won't get counted as a completer, which is unfortunate. So again, the goal is to get everybody to finish before your grant ends. Next slide. And a further plug for remembering, again, as those of you that are finishing up, everyone needs to be exited or completed. So again, those folks that are, like, if you are not having a no cost extension, everybody will have to be reported as exited without completion if they aren't done yet by the time the grant ends. And like I said, if we'll end up giving you a phone call to kind of go over the statuses if anybody is still in an enrolled status. Next slide. Okay. When does the 2002 PDP DCS data collection period end? And I chose all of these dates because there are lots of dates that have been thrown at you. There's training dates, there's APR dates, there's different APR dates. So yes, the answer is April 8th. So, and again, you have until midnight, and then we'll take our snapshot. Next slide. Okay, you have a participant who was previously funded on a PDP grant. Who should you contact? Do you contact the PDP DCS Help Desk, Angela Hernandez, the OIE Technical Assistance Team? And there is no need to contact anyone until the participant graduates. So this one's trickier because really I would have taken A or B because in all likelihood, the PDP DCS Help Desk is going to loop in Angela because she likes to take a quick look at, like, again, the different you know, what was this participant doing before? Have they already fulfilled a service obligation? How much of a service obligation, you know, does this person have from their previous grant? And I think earlier, Doug, you know, mentioned a good point. You know, you all don't have access to that information. Luckily, Angela does. She can, like, if you have a conversation with her or you send her the name of the person, she has the ability to go into the PDP DCS and look at all of this herself to better prepare for the conversation with you about whether or not this is something to proceed with. So again, I know that not all of you, I mean, obviously sometimes you have funded this person twice, but in some instances you haven't. So I think that's really important to go ahead and you know, Angela as your project officer is fantastic. So next slide. So we left time for questions, and I like that, actually. You can feel free to throw all the yucky stuff at Angela. That's totally fine with me. I am ready to demo or answer any questions that you feel like you need towards the data collection. I know many of you are pros at this point, but again, any questions or concerns?
And just FYI, it doesn't have to be just about the DCS
Right,
either.
yes.
If you have any other
yes,
questions,
yucky questions Angela will answer. Feel free to come up with a yucky question and throw it at Angela.
Or throw it at your peers. If there's something that you're trying to problem solve, that's what your peers are for as well. It's Friday. And I don't know about you guys, but over here, it is absolutely beautiful today. Now, Sunday snow, but today, I think it's almost 60. My windows are open. It's wonderful. No, I know we've been throwing a lot at you, and I've been trying to continue to communicate this stuff consistently. I don't expect you guys to memorize it. So if you have to send me a note, like, when is that due again? I'm not going to be upset. You have a lot of stuff coming at you. But I do hope that you will take the time to revisit this if you haven't yet gotten to the point of entering recruited candidates in. Go to that recording that Karen spoke of from earlier this week. And if and when you get to a point and you can't go any further, that's what the help desk is for. So I would encourage you to not hesitate to go and ask any question that you need to get folks in efficiently. I'm also just curious, for those of you who have used the digital service payback agreement, if anybody wants to share anything that's worked out well and any kind of lessons learned from it, that would be really helpful, I think, to your peers as well.
And don't be afraid if it was problematic. I know some of you had trouble. We are currently pushing out definitely one fix that Renuka raised on Wednesday. But again, we're always looking for ways of improving it.
Yes, yes. And thank you so much. You did. I think we had what, 3 people involved in that? It was one of those glitches, and I've been working through it since September. Just emails going back and forth. And I think it's only when I spoke with Amanda and that she really saw the page, she understood what was happening. Because I kept getting emails saying, okay, this is the process, this is what you do. Well, you can't do that when this is not fixed. So, but anyways, all's good. Thank you. So if I'm late, that's entirely my fault, but I don't intend to be now. I mean, I will follow through and, get things done. Thank you so much, Karen, Amanda, and everybody else. Thank you.
I just have one thing, and that is that if you make a mistake in the digital entry of the Social Security number, it's like a total fail because you can't get back and fix it unless you get the help desk in. And so I had that happen to me where I just was off by a digit on the Social Security, and that kind of once you put that in for the participant, it locks it down. And so they're not able to change it, and I wasn't able to change it, and so we had the PDP help desk personnel go in and, wave the wand over. And so we could make that digit correct. And then we went through the whole process again of the participant signing, then I sign, and then I enter all the following data. So that's one field in that is a hard door. You can't open it once you shut it. And so be really careful about the Social Security, but otherwise I think it works pretty well. I didn't realize they couldn't put their middle name in there. Who said that? Somebody said that you can't get, but none of mine have done that. And I don't have a middle name, so I never even think about that. They weren't invented back when I was born.
We are very protective of Social Security numbers. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because we just don't want people to be able to change them easily. So yes, but you as project directors can reach out. It's actually easier for you as project directors to give us a change in a Social Security number than it is for a participant. They end up having to send us a picture of the Social Security card later. Like, so if it doesn't get fixed, so I really appreciate Carmelita staying with it and doing it now, because it's actually a little bit easier. The burden of changing it for a participant is much greater, because again, we don't want to accidentally invalidate one of these debts.
Karen, do you want to speak at all to Nikki's point? Thank you, Nikki, for raising this about not being able to enter a middle name when signing.
I hadn't even thought about that, but I'm actually thinking that I want to look at the language on the page, because maybe we can just sort of make sure, again, that we're looking for only the first and the last name. Because you're right, like a lot of people, when they think about signing an important document, they are putting their middle name in, or even like a middle initial. And so We didn't include that because it's not a required field for you to provide us a middle name. So there would be no way of knowing, and we have to have a way of confirming, you know, this is the exact person. So we just did first and last name. So I think what we'll do is just try to improve the instruction there.
Thanks, Karen. And thank you, Nikki, for raising that. Kelly, I'm glad that the digital form's working out for your folks. And yes, I know it's been a little bit of a lift and a learning curve there, but I think certainly it's going to really pay off to be a much more efficient way of capturing this and being able to track it without a lot of burden on your end later.
I was just going to say kind of how we do it, and the way, and the reason why we like it so much is, so when I have one individual that's the secondary user, they sit down and they are meeting with the student. We do a one-on-one. We have an entire packet that we're going through. They're signing the forms, and then we pull it up at that very moment. I zoom in during this same time. And so as this is entered, then I get an email notification. I can pull it up right then. I review it. And so if there's anything that I see, then I can talk to them directly. And then I go ahead and approve it right then. And then the secondary user is able, we walk the student through it. They sign it as well. And so we just do everything at that moment with the student. So that's why it's working really well for us, because the two of us are actually in it at the exact same time.
That's awesome, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a great process. And I know that's not always feasible for all of you, but I think to the extent that you have those supports in place or can get them, that can certainly help make it that much easier. I want to respect your time. I know we're at 4:01. I'm happy to stay on if anybody has any other questions. Otherwise, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk soon. Okay. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
You know, Lonnie, I realized we didn't get to some of the reminders, but I've been reminding them so much.
Yeah.
Got them on overload.
That's all good.
Yeah.
They got the meat of it. That's the important part.
Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Karen, thank you. That was great.
All right. Talk to you Monday.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.